This is the Hikawa Maru, a museum ship in Yokohama, Japan. The Hikawa Maru was launched in 1930 as an ocean liner. Its regular route was Yokohama to Vancouver, Seattle, and then back to Yokohama. The ship continued this route until 1941. In October 1941, it was one of the last Japanese ships to leave a U.S. port. It was one of the few ships given an exemption to the rules at the time, which banned Japanese ships from coming into U.S. ports and would seize them. In the 1940s, it became important for a lot of refugees escaping Eastern Europe, so they would get permission to pass through Japan. So they would go through the Soviet Union, what's now Russia, take the Trans-Siberian Railroad, take a ship from Vladivostok to Japan, and then Japan to either Canada or the United States. So its last trip to the United States, it was carrying a lot of refugees and Americans that were looking to repatriate. And then coming back to Japan, it carried a lot of Japanese that were looking to repatriate. Then when it returned, it was converted into a hospital ship, and it spent World War II as a hospital ship. After the war ended, it was one of two Japanese ocean liners to survive the war. It became a repatriation ship. After that was finished, it was used as a cargo ship for a little bit of time, and then returned to being an ocean liner serving that Yokohama, Vancouver, Seattle route. That's actually kind of a nice view of the bay. So because this is an ocean liner and this is a nice section of the ship, its hallways are nice and wide, and I don't have to worry about bumping my head. One interesting thing about this ship is that for first class, they had a nursery where there were female crew members who were responsible for watching after kids, and it was also open during dinner. So if you were in first class, you could enjoy dinner without your kids, which, I'm gonna be totally honest, as a parent, I would really appreciate that, because, dinner's hard with a 2-year-old. It really is. The room has Art Deco style, and you can see silverware. Now, what's interesting about the silverware used on the ship is it was about 2 or 3 millimeters thicker than normal silverware you would use on shore, because it's a ship, it's rocking back and forth. Here we have the first class reading room, which would be space to either read or write. For the first class passengers, they of course had some books. I imagine a lot of the passengers brought their own, so there was no TV, there was no electronics to entertain yourself, so reading and writing was a bigger pastime back then. Here we have the social hall, which during the day there'd be chairs and tables out here to socialize. In the evening, the chairs and tables would be removed and would be used as a space for dancing. Now, generally at this time, because of social expectations, this was actually more of a social room for women than for men. Men were more likely to do their socializing in the smoking lounge. Here we have the ship's post office, which would only be open while the ship is at sea. It was for use by all the classes. The ship's cancellation stamps, sometimes called an on-board stamp, was actually viewed as a good memory of a voyage. A little bit of a memento collectible. And here's the post box. Here we can see the route. So oftentimes the ship would start in Kobe and make a few stops along Japan until it got to Yokohama, where we are now. So that was sort of the start of the long leg. So from Yokohama, they would sail north, passing not that far from the Aleutians, which is not a very nice place to sail if you've ever been on a ship. This is an area where a lot of ships have sunk because of bad weather. It would take about 13 days. Then they would get to North America. They'd usually stop in Vancouver first and then Seattle. So if you were a first class passenger, it would cost about 500 yen to cross. Now at the time, you have to remember the yen was actually a pretty decently sized silver coin. I'll try to put some conversions into modern currency on the video. A fresh out of college recruit working on the ship would make about 70 yen a month, and a house would cost about 1,000 yen. So, give you an idea of how expensive it was to travel by first class. Now, let's look over here. So, here we have a card, first class, you get 500 yen, about 250 US dollars one way. Tourist class, 125 US dollars or 250 yen. And then third class would cost between 55 and 70 US dollars, which would be 110 to 140 yen. Calculate exchange rate 1930, 1 US dollar equals about 2 yen. For first class, it was actually relatively relaxing. It's supposed to be fun, even though sometimes it wasn't so much fun when the ship was rocking. Charlie Chaplin actually took this ship, in the later times took a different ship from the same line, partially because he liked the food so much. As you can see, they hosted different parties for the first class. Now to the kind of not so nice part. On December 18th, 1930, the ship hit a particularly nasty patch which saw it list 29 degrees to port, 25 degrees starboard, which is really extreme, and that's when stuff starts flying around. Now, along with bringing passengers, the Hikawa Maru also brought in silk. So silk was actually a very valuable commodity at the time. So this silk would generally be brought to Seattle, and then by train brought to the eastern part of the United States, where it'd be woven into garments, particularly Connecticut at the time. Now, because this is heavy and the seas, the North Sea of the Pacific is not so nice, they actually built basically pegs like this to hold the bales in. So there would be a peg here and a peg here to stop it from moving back and forth, because this can happen to ships. The cargo all moves to one side. Now the ship is weighed too much to one side, and we start tipping, and the gimbal stopping me from tipping the camera. So, imported wheat, zinc, copper, lumber, pulp, cowhide, salted salmon, herring, gold, and live rabbits. Export, raw silk, silk cloth, ceramic ware, tea, live goldfish, and seed oysters. That's right, goldfish. That was the other big thing here. So at the end of the voyage, the first class would have a nice dinner together. They would pose for pictures, which were keepsakes. Now, this is not as important anymore, but at the time, Seattle was the terminus of the Great Northern Railroad. So, from Seattle, you could get almost anywhere in the United States using the massive railroad system at the time. The U.S. used to be one of the leaders for rail transportation in the world. Now it basically just uses it for freight. This is an example of a first-class cabin. So they had American-produced beds, spring mattresses, faucet with both hot and cold water. You notice there's a heater there, so you can heat up your kettle, mirror, windows, big dresser, very, very nice remote heating. Well ventilated. One of the things to remember is we didn't have cell phones, the internet. The world wasn't as interconnected back then in the 1930s. So when you were on a ship like this, it was pretty relaxing. You didn't have much to do. So for a lot of first-class passengers, this was a relaxing time for them to just sit on the ship, enjoy your tea, socialize, relax, rest. Well, when the weather was nice. This is the smoking room for the first class. So, due to convention at the time, this was a manned space. So, cigarettes, cigars, liquor, playing cards. This is where a lot of the first class men would spend their time on board. You see, it's got more of a, I don't know, manly aesthetic than the social lounge, which was generally more of a women's space. It wasn't solely for women, unlike the first class smoking room. What you'll notice is that the cabin blankets, they have the name of the line on it. Second off, they're folded into different patterns to replicate different things. It's sort of a thing that the stewards did that was kind of a, I don't know, source of joy among the passengers. break up the monotony of 13 days at sea. So this is called Kazari Mofu. This is the deluxe cabin. So this was for VIPs. So Charlie Chaplin, the Imperial Prince and Princess used this cabin when they traveled. So here they have a living room, bathroom, bedroom. So it gave them more privacy away from regular people, away from even the peons of the first class. This is the wheelhouse, also called the bridge on other ships. So actually, a lot of the things in here were state-of-the-art when the ship was new. So we have our engine telegraph, we have our radar. Let's go look at some fun stuff over here. So this is voice tubes. So if you shouted in this one, your voice would go to the captain's day room. If you shouted in this one, it would go to the captain's night room. Now, the problem with a lot of vocal systems is that it gets very loud. As the ship was used in warfare later, that becomes a bigger issue. And so that's where a lot of the telegraph systems become more important to be able to communicate. Now, the engine room, it was always important because the engines are loud. These are extremely loud, big engines. It's hard for them to hear in there. So that was an early system for using telegraphs. Now let's look at the fire detection system. This is actually very interesting. So each of these corresponds with a different area of the ship. And so they suck in air and they bring it here. So having a light in here, they're able to see if there's smoke coming out of one of these. And then when the smoke is detected, a trouble light goes off. So that way they can quickly find the fire, find where the smoke is coming from, and send crews. Because a fire, despite the fact you're in the middle of water, a fire is very dangerous to a ship. All right, wireless telegraph office. All right, let's look at this. Radio room. Radios were very important. Oh, that must be code. JGXC. Okay. Here we have a Morse code station. You can try it out yourself. So, by this point in history, radar was becoming important for locating objects that you didn't expect and could run into, particularly at night or when the weather was inclement and you lost visibility. So early on, you could yell down orders, and a lot of times that system was kept. However, it was eventually replaced with a telegraph system. Here we have the captain's day room, which also functions as the captain's office. If you go through that door is his bedroom and bathroom. So, like pretty much every ship I've shown, the captain's spaces are near the wheelhouse or bridge so that he can respond quickly. Now, in here, right, come on, focus, right there is a voice tube. I showed it up on the bridge too, so that way the captain and the officer of the deck can communicate with each other at any time. Like any ship, redundancy is important, so there was often a way to control the ship outside of the bridge, which we can see kind of up there. And another engine telegram. Here, of course, we have the anchor, the stern. Kind of gives you a nice view of Yokohama from here. Here we have the ship's engine room. So these engines are massive. And these were cutting-edge engines in 1930 when they were installed onto the ship. So the engines actually take up multiple levels of the ship. Engineering space, and I have to go back to being careful with my head. Ooh, they were nice enough to wrap that in foam. So these are the original voice tubes. The issue being it is so loud in here, it's actually hard to hear anything. So they actually have a telephone box in a sound dampened, close to soundproof room. You notice how padded and thick the door is. So to talk with the wheelhouse, the engineers would actually go in here, close the door, and then pick up the phone and go talk to the wheelhouse. This is why engine telegraphs were so important and such a good invention, was because it was so loud in this thing. Smaller green engine, actually from Denmark, is an auxiliary engine. So it's for controlling the bigger engines and for controlling the rudder. Here we have an example of a third class cabin. So you see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 beds to a room. So they separated the third class from the tourist and first class. There wasn't free mixing of them. Meals in third class were served in room, more family style, with boiled fish. Kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. You know, it's third class. It was a cheaper option for traveling by a lot. Here we have a map of the different routes that served. So we're going to start with the red one, which is the original, 1930 to 1941, and then was picked back up in 1953 till 1960. So basically along the Chinese coast to Japan, and then from Yokohama it would leave. It would take a route through the North Pacific. It would stop in Canada and Seattle in the United States, Hawaii, then back to Japan. Now, 1941, it was taken over by the Japanese military for wartime usage and turned into a hospital ship. Those would be the purple route. So you see it mainly served in the southern fronts. So in here, modern Indonesia, modern Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines. It had to stay in Davao for a while because it got damaged. Same in Singapore. It got damaged in Singapore Strait. Now, after the war was over, it was used for repatriations. It was one of only 2 Japanese ocean liners to survive the war, so it was very useful for getting soldiers, civilians, Japanese citizens home. So, let's see, Manchuria, Korea, a lot in Indonesia, in the islands. Now, after that, it was returned to NYK. Now, they only had 37 ships survive, so they actually spent a lot of time doing cargo work, but also took a route to Europe for a while. Then, 1953, it basically returned to this route, going Yokohama, Vancouver, Seattle, and back. I hope you enjoyed this little tour of the Hikawa Maru as much as I did. Why don't you go down into the comment section and tell me what your favorite part of the ship? Thank you.